Hello, and welcome to some Dodge family history. This is where I present information and research on my ancestors who served in the military during the early 20th century. Today, I will be presenting on the military service of Staff Sergeant David Nemetzky, Medical Department, from his reenlistment in January of 1924 through his final discharge by purchase in January of 1931. We will use records that are available online, such as the monthly muster rolls on Family Search, the morning reports on Fold 3, and the troopship manifests on Ancestry, as well as his reconstructed file from the National Archives at St. Louis, to tell the story of this last chapter of his military service. This revised presentation also includes special orders and Surgeon General's Office correspondence housed at the National Archives at College Park, Maryland, and researched in 2025, as well as information found in the Army and Navy Journal. Staff Sergeant David Nemetzky was discharged on January 21, 1924, and reenlisted the next day per orders issued and received earlier that month. His orders read, Staff Sergeant David Nemetzky, R850422, Medical Department, William Beaumont General Hospital, El Paso, Texas, will proceed to Fort McDowell, California, so as to arrive 15 days prior to sailing of transports scheduled to sail on or about February 19, 1924. Reporting upon arrival to the commanding officer, Overseas Discharge and Replacement Depot for transportation to Manila, Philippine Islands. Upon arrival at Manila, Philippine Islands, Staff Sergeant Nemetzky will report to the Commanding General, Philippine Department, for temporary duty pending the sailing of the first transport for China, when he will be sent to report to the Commanding General, American Forces in China, for a tour of Foreign Service Net Command, to fill original vacancy. He left his post at Beaumont General Hospital on January 26th, arriving at Fort McDowell a few days later. He left Fort McDowell on February 20th aboard the U.S. Army Transport Thomas, bound for China. He arrived at the port in Manila on March 17, 1924. The Thomas left Manila on March 24th with Sergeant Nemetzky aboard. Unlike his first time in Manila in 1912, he did not miss a boat to China. He arrived at Chin Wang Tao on the 29th and was back at Tientsin the next day, March 30th. In October of 1924, while at Tientsin, Staff Sergeant Nemetzky took the examination for promotion to Technical Sergeant, rank known as Sergeant First Class today. The results of the examination were published in the Army and Navy Journal on April 11, 1925. He qualified for the promotion. However, he was 43rd on the promotion list. Also, there were limited possibilities for promotion. These two factors meant that those on the promotion list would not be promoted immediately. As it would turn out, David Nemetzky would remain a staff sergeant for the remainder of his military career. Also, while in China, he submitted his application for his World War I adjusted compensation. The only evidence of this is his VA index card. Many of the VA index cards were created with the information that was submitted by World War I veterans when they submitted their application for adjusted compensation, which would have been in 1924 and 1925. His VA index cards indicates that he was living at the station hospital, American Barracks in Tientsin, China. The application for adjusted compensation, or bonus application, would have been kept in his VA claims file, but despite my several requests, the VA has been unable to locate his claims file. Sergeant Nemetzky spent 2 days on detached service at Chin Wang Tao from November 21st through the 23rd, 1924. He had been given orders to escort patients to the port at Chin Wang Tao for their return to the United States. In April of 1925, he also spent time at Tongshan, China, for the purpose of checking and inspecting medical department equipment and supplies at that station. These are the last recorded detached services for Sergeant Nemetzky. On September 8, 1925, orders were issued for Sergeant Nemetzky to return to the United States. On October 11th, he boarded the U.S. Army Transport Thomas and arrived in San Francisco on November 4th. From there, he was assigned to Camp Lewis, Washington, arriving there on November 13th. He stayed at Camp Lewis through his discharge in January of 1927. He re-enlisted at Camp Lewis on January 22, 1927, and was immediately transferred back east. For this transfer, rather than traveling cross-country by train from Camp Lewis, Sergeant Nemetzky was sent back to Fort McDowell to travel by ship from California to the Army base in Brooklyn, New York. He traveled aboard the U.S. Army transport Chateau Thierry, leaving San Francisco on February 9, 1927. The Chateau Thierry sailed through the Panama Canal and arrived at Brooklyn on February 26. He was assigned to Fort Hancock, New Jersey, arriving there on March 5th. While at Fort Hancock, he was given a 30-day furlough from May 11th through June 9th. On December 21, 1927, he was aboard the U.S. Army Transport St. Mihiel on his way to his next assignment, Letterman General Hospital. Once again sailing through the Panama Canal, he arrived back in San Francisco on January 7, 1928. He was back at Letterman General Hospital 2 days later. Staff Sergeant Nemetzky would spend the last 3 years of his military service at Letterman General Hospital. Staff Sergeant Nemetzky applied for and took the examination for promotion to Master Sergeant in September of 1929. The Army and Navy Journal from March 29, 1930, reported the results of the examination. Staff Sergeant Nemetzky was eligible for promotion to Master Sergeant. However, just like when he qualified for promotion to Tech Sergeant, he was low on the promotion list, this time number 44 on the list, and there were limited possibilities for promotion. 1930 would be an eventful year for Staff Sergeant Nemetzky. He was honorably discharged on January 21st and re-enlisted the next day. On January 24th, he married Frances Fogelsang in San Francisco. Frances was born Frances Cleveland Dodge in November of 1888 in Buena Vista, Colorado. She moved to San Francisco around 1912 and originally worked as a nurse. In 1916, she married Thomas Fogelsang, and they would open a candy store in San Francisco in 1923. Thomas Fogelsang passed away in 1928. It isn't known how Sergeant Nemetzky and Frances Fogelsang met. It is possible that he may have found her candy store and stopped there one day, meeting her there. Also in 1930, David Nemetzky was involved in another car accident. The Redwood City Tribune from June 17, 1930 reports, as a result of a 3-car mix-up on the La Honda Grade on March 23rd, Ms. Clara Meng asks $20,311 damages from David Nemetzky in suit filed in Judge George H. Buck's court today. At the time of the crash, Mrs. Meng was riding in a car with Charles Lighthall. Nemetzky, she declares, attempted to pass Lighthall's car on a turn while a third auto was coming in the opposite direction. Lighthall's machine was overturned and Mrs. Meng seriously injured, according to the complaint. The case was ultimately dismissed. Staff Sergeant Nemetzky finished 1930 by taking a 90-day furlough. Staff Sergeant David Nemetzky applied for discharge by purchase in January of 1931. As his 201 file was destroyed in the 1973 fire, the application for discharge no longer exists. He had been at Letterman General for 3 years, and it is possible he may have received orders to be transferred. It is likely that he cited his marriage and wanting to help out his wife with her business, rather than being transferred as a reason for discharge. It is also possible that he requested discharge by purchase because he had not received the promotions that he qualified for. He was honorably discharged by purchase on January 27, 1931. The purchase price for his discharge was $30. Staff Sergeant David Nemetzky had served a total of 25 years, 4 months, and 11 days in the Army, serving from January of 1904 to September of 1909, and from March of 1911 to January of 1931. At the time of his discharge by purchase, to be retired from the Army required 30 years service, at which time the retiring soldier would have qualified for a pension. Having served 25 years, it does not appear that David Nemetzky would have received a pension. David Nemetzky lived with his wife, Frances, in San Francisco until his death on May 4, 1947. He is buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Colma, just south of San Francisco. The government paid $150 toward his funeral costs. His widow, Frances, would likely have received a pension from the VA for his military service following his death until her passing in 1955. This information would have been saved in his VA claims file, but again, after several requests, the VA has never taken the time to locate his VA claims file, even though I have verified his VA claims file is in custody of the VA. I hope you have enjoyed this final presentation and found it informative. While there are some records, such as his 201 file, that are no longer available, and other records, such as his VA claims file, which is unable to be located despite verification his VA claims file is in VA custody, there are other records, such as the monthly musters and many of the morning reports, as well as his reconstructed file at the National Archives in St. Louis and the bimonthly musters and special orders at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., that are available and combined together have helped reconstruct his military service file. Additionally, special orders, hospital records, and Surgeon General's office correspondence housed at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, have added additional information to his later military service. Staff Sergeant Nemetzky served a total of 25 years in the Army, spending time both stateside and overseas. Despite setbacks early on, he served the United States honorably and faithfully throughout his military career. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Nemetzky, for your service. Thank you for watching.